Atin, we are live now. We can start.
Yeah, we can start now, right? So, Kanya?
Yes, we can start.
Okay, yeah, okay. So, hello and warm welcome to all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. I am Atin Biswas from the Center for Science and Environment, along with my senior colleague, Mr. Siddharth Singh and Ms. Sukanya Nair. We welcome you all in today's webinar. So, just for a common understanding, Center for Science and Environment is a civil society organization based in New Delhi, India. And it has been working in the space of environmental governance since 1981. So we have a legacy of 40 years of our work. Just to put a perspective in today's discussion, today we are going to discuss the initiative by the United Nations Environment Program. Ever since United Nations Environment Assembly was formed in 2012, and the historical resolution 514 to end plastic pollution through a legally binding instrument by 2025. There's a lot to talk about, starting from the first open-ended working group meeting in Dakar, Senegal in May 2022, followed by the first Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee 1 or INC 1 in Punta del Este, Uruguay, followed by the second INC in Paris, France in May 2023, and the third and recently concluded meeting in Kenya, Nairobi in November, held between 13th to 19th November. So basically the question is, where are we headed? Are we headed toward the right direction? Can we have the legally binding instrument as decided earlier? And basically, what are the key takeaways? Is it going to talk about, are we going to have a strong treaty that basically covers the full life cycle of plastic? Or what should we expect from the INC? So that's basically is the question that we are going to contemplate with three amazing panelists who bring in very different perspectives. So we have Dr. Sam originally from Ghana, Africa, but he's currently joining us from Geneva. We have Dr. Tricia from New Zealand, and we have Mr. David from Geneva as well. So we'll introduce the panelists to all of you as we invite them to speak. A couple of housekeeping announcements before we start. We request all the participants to post their questions only in the Q&A box so that it's easier for us to pick up. We have received more than 300 registrations from all over the world. In addition, we are going to stream this program live on all social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. So we are expecting to be joined by many more colleagues from all over the world. Let me now just quickly explain the structure of this program. So we'll start with a very short discussion on the key takeaways from the third Intergovernmental Negotiation Committee meeting that held recently in Nairobi, Kenya. Followed by that, we will have questions for our panelists. And once that part is over, then we'll start taking questions from the participants. So let me now stop here and let me now invite my colleague Siddharth to tell us about the key takeaways from the INC3. Siddharth, the floor is now yours.
Thanks, Atin. So before we go to the experts, just for our audience, let me give you a brief overview of what really happened at the INC3. So the zero draft of which was basically put forth by the Secretariat in consultation with the chair was the basis of negotiations at the third meeting, which is where the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee basically negotiates the text of the zero draft. And this formation of INC is mandated by UNIA's Resolution 5/14 that Atin just spoke about. So the structure of the zero draft, I'll also put up the zero draft after I am done talking so that all our participants can have a look at it. But the structure of the zero draft basically was, it had several provisions, and every provision basically had 2 to 4 options. So every member state that basically was a part of the negotiation either could agree to either of the options, or they could say that they do not agree to this mandate, and which means that there has to be no text that is reflected, or they could simply say that we agree to this, and in addition to what the text says, we also want something to be added, which either could further strengthen the provision, or it could also weaken the tradition, the provision. So what was discussed was, the first thing is the objective of the treaty, which basically talks about what the treaty would want to achieve in the longer run. And then the zero draft was divided into 5 different parts. The substantial elements of the treaty were mostly covered in part 2 of the zero draft text. So it had, because the resolution 5/14 also mandates that uh, the the future treaty should consider the life cycle, the entire life cycle of plastic. So the zero draft text had upstream, midstream, and downstream measures. Upstream measures included measures like primary plastic polymers, or production of primary plastic polymers, chemicals and polymers of concern, and problematic and avoidable plastics. These upstream measures actually faced a lot of resistance from the oil and plastic producing member states, who either rejected most of the measures, or they opted for a no text option that deals with these critical issues. And the group of member states also accused the zero draft put forth by the Secretariat of achieving more than its mandate. Then we had midstream measures like product design, reduce, reuse, refill mechanisms, use of recycled contents, and alternative plastics and non-plastic substitutes. Here as well, most of the oil and plastic producing nations actually stated that this is where the life cycle of plastic begins from, because this is where a polymer actually takes the form of a product, and this is where the discussions actually should start from. So most of the oil and plastic producing member states have agreed to weaker provisions, especially in terms of product design. And it was after the intervention of these countries that now the revised zero draft text that we have, which is the inflated version of the zero draft, has terminologies like circular plastics and sustainable production. And then there were downstream provisions like extended producer responsibility, emissions and releases of plastics, and waste management. Uh, Again, here the oil and plastic producing nations uh, mostly rejected the language on extended producer responsibility. Some also said that they do not agree to the principles of polluter pays, despite mentioning that they do agree that principles should be borrowed from the Rio Declarations. But they did not agree to the polluter pays principle, which is a part of the Rio Declaration. And a lot of member states actually were pushing for a treaty that solely focuses on plastic waste management. Um, Apart from this, the zero draft text also addresses critical issues like trade of polymers, chemicals, and plastic products, leakages, just transition, transparency tracking, monitoring, and labeling. And then there was a part that was dedicated to financial assistance, capacity building, technology transfer, and national plans. Most of the disagreements that we saw in INC 3 meeting was in the part 2, where the substantial elements were to be discussed. So now, on this note, I would just stop here, and we have some questions for our panelists, and we will introduce them as we call upon them. So I think the first question is for Dr. Sam, and let me introduce Dr. Sam for our audience today. So Dr. Sam Adukumi is a renowned expert in the sound management of chemicals and waste, and is the executive director of Enviro Health Consult and Environment Youth Action Network, an environmental NGO based in Accra, Ghana. He's the immediate past programs coordinator and focal person for chemicals and waste-related multilateral environmental agreements and frameworks in Ghana. He was also the directors of Chemicals Control and Management Center of the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency in Ghana, a position that he occupied from 2012 until September 2021. Dr. Sam holds a PhD degree in nuclear and environmental protection from the University of Ghana. He's a part-time senior lecturer at the University of Ghana and has authored and co-authored more than 30 peer-reviewed scientific publications. Dr. Sam Adukumi served as the president of the 8th Conference of Parties to the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants and also served as the member of the Persistent Organic Pollutants Review Committee. He was a co-chair of the Specific International Program, which is a financial mechanism under the Minamata Convention on Mercury. Dr. Sam has facilitated and moderated several discussions on chemicals and waste policy-related issues at international, regional, and national levels. He's currently a member of the United Nations Environment Program Special Program Trust Fund, as well as a member of advisory board of the International Sustainable Chemistry Collaboration Center based in Bonn, Germany. So welcome, Dr. Sam, and I'll let Atin ask the question.
Thank you, Siddharth. And I welcome once more Dr. Sam. Thank you so much for your time and your participation. So, Dr. Sam, my question to you is, in the light of Africa's commitment to a very robust, legally binding treaty, particularly considering the presence of the oil-producing member states such as Nigeria, Ghana, and more recently, Namibia how is the region effectively encouraging these countries to align with the ambitious stance of the African group? Additionally, if you could also throw some light on what strategies do you anticipate for the other regions like Asia or the group of Latin American countries, commonly known as the GRULAC, employing to enhance their position as a regional groups in the ongoing discussions? Over to you, Dr. Sam. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, organizers, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be around this time of the day. And I thank the organizers for, arresting me, let me put that way, to participate in this meeting, because they know that I'm really in here in Geneva for another important meeting starting this morning. But I agreed to take part. So if I may answer your questions in two phases. First of all, let me assure you that the UNEA resolution 514 was taken by all 175 member states of the United Nations in March 2022, and for that matter, is binding on all member states. In Africa, the African Ministerial Conference on Environment, what we call ANSEN, subsequently, based on the resolution 514 of UNEA, also established what we call African Group of Negotiators, with Ghana as the chair. And Ghana is supposed to report to the AMSEN regularly about how Africa is faring in the negotiations. And Ghana as a chair has a responsibility to ensure that all the member states, all the regional countries in the region participate in this meeting, first of all, as sovereign countries and also as members of the community. So for the first part of your question, even though Ghana has found oil and we are an oil producing or exporting country, at this point in time, we are also the chair of the AGN and also a member state of the UN. So when we meet before and after the meetings of the INCs, we look at the issues on the table, and then we judge, or let me put that way, and looking at the options, for example, as your colleague mentioned, the option paper or the zero draft give us options to choose from. So we as a region we look at all the options on the table and come to an agreement. We have what we call the green, the yellow, and the red. The red means that we don't want that option. The green means that that is what we want. And the yellow means that many of the countries want or others don't want. That means it's the middle way. So our preferred choice is the green one, which we go with. And if there are issues, perhaps we will look at how the yellow one will, but the red is a no-go area. So when we've all agreed as a region, even though we are sovereign states, we have other issues. Once we say that this is what we are going with, then Ghana as the mouthpiece, and then we develop statements, and Ghana reads a statement on behalf of the region. We have mandated our countries also to join the contact groups with specific mandates, which we have discussed. So it means that what we are discussing at the INCs are not from Ghana or not from a specific country, but that is what we have agreed on, the compromise text that we are going with. So that's how we do our work. So we have challenges, economic, social, and other things, but we are all in a global community where plastics have become a menace, and therefore we have issues to discuss with. So that's where Ghana leads the African group negotiators and the INCs. And then talking about the other aspect where perhaps what we can do, the strategy you have in place to deal or talk to other regional groupings. I think we are in negotiations, and we need to ensure that all voices are heard. We have an African voice, the GRULAC voice, Asia Pacific, Europe, and other places, other parts, other groupings as well, the UN. So we believe that we need to have bilateral engagement with other groupings, and we put out on the table. We know how matters are going on in the INCs. So with that in mind, we meet and see how best perhaps all of us can also work together and come with a common, because it's a global issue. Climate change is also mainly due to chemicals and plastic constitute a larger part of it. We are on the same planet, on the same planet Earth. So we cannot destroy our planet and then maybe because we are sovereignties. No, we need to come together and work together and save the planet and the people, our people, the environment. So perhaps let me end here. If you want to ask more questions, I can also elaborate further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sam. We have more questions for you. Let me now bring in our next panelist, Professor Tricia. But before I ask the question to Professor Tricia, Siddharth, if you could please introduce her for me.
Okay. So Professor Tricia Farrelly is a professor at the School of People, Environment and Planning at the Massey University. She's the co-founder of New Zealand Product Stewardship Council and Aotearoa Plastic Pollution Alliance. Professor Tricia has been a member of the United Nations Environment Programme expert group on marine litter and plastics since 2017. She's also a member of New Zealand's National Container Deposit Scheme Working Group. Professor Tricia has co-edited the book titled Plastic Legacies, Pollution, Persistence and Politics with Dr. Sai Tafel and Professor Ian Shaw. Professor Tricia is the university representative at Association of Social Anthropologists, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Massey University's focal point for Association of Commonwealth Universities Blue Charter Fellows on Marine Plastics. So welcome, Professor Tricia.
Thank you, Siddharth.
Thank you, Siddharth, and welcome, Professor Tricia, once more for your time and your participation. Thank you so much. So my question to you, Professor Tricia, as a member of the Scientific Coalition, we have observed numerous member states emphasizing the need for the upcoming treaty to be strongly guided by scientific insights. Could you provide clarity to our audience on the scientific perspectives regarding plastic pollution? Especially, how does plastic pollution contribute to pushing the triple planetary boundaries, and what are the implications for human health? Over to you, Professor Tricia. Thank you so much.
Good question. Thank you very much for that. There's a lot in there, Atin, so I'll do my very best in a short period of time. So from a scientific perspective, the most effective and comprehensive global plastics treaty should be guided by the precautionary principle, simplification, so simplification of like chemicals and polymers and products, for example, transparency, all while ensuring a just transition at every phase. And importantly, the treaty must be based on the best available scientific knowledge. And we're working in partnership with the Indigenous Peoples Caucus and the International Alliance of Waste Pickers and other important knowledge and rights holders to progress the science around plastic pollution. And of course, a comprehensive and effective treaty. So the treaty implementation must effectively respond to the rapidly evolving science on the significant impacts of plastic pollution on human and environmental health. The Scientists Coalition endorse the broad adoption of 3 key components from the Montreal Protocol. The first is the concept of essential use. And 2 elements of an essential use are that a material or product or service is necessary for health, safety, or is critical for the functioning of society, and that there are no available technically and economically feasible alternatives. Secondly, we support time-bound reduction targets for chemicals associated with plastics and primary plastic polymers. And we advocate for that chemicals, polymers, products, technologies, and services should be permitted based on the following criteria: safety, sustainability, essentiality, and transparency. And we were disappointed. We were disappointed that there was no consensus on intersessional work at INC3. However, I guess this has really galvanized the Scientists Coalition to informally work towards work on evidence-based reduction targets and hazards-based assessment criteria, which we are working on or planning towards starting now, and working towards INC4 with some preliminary work in that space. Next, we propose that a dedicated, independent and trusted scientific body or science policy interface should be formulated as a subsidiary body under the future treaty. And this should have the mandate to formulate the targets we're looking to start work on, those production reduction targets, and effective mechanisms for the implementation. And finally, an effective and comprehensive treaty would focus at the top of the waste hierarchy and prioritise prevention, reduction, redesign of materials and products, chemicals, systems and services and technologies, and really pushing for reuse and refill and the right to repair with dedicated financing to enable this critical systems change. You asked about the triple planetary boundary, so I'll briefly respond to that question now too. So there's overwhelming evidence now that plastics and their associated chemicals have breached the planet's safe operating space for novel entities. Plastics, as we know, are a complex mix of chemicals, and 99% of all plastics produced are based on fossil fuel-based feedstocks. There's also obviously bio feedstocks as well for alternatives, but that's a small percentage of those plastics that are produced at this stage. And we're seeing a huge increase in plastics production. So we're seeing between 79% plastic production increase between 2000 and 2015. And the production of chemicals have increased 50-fold since 1950. So huge spikes in both plastic production, but also chemical production. And a whole lot of different chemicals have been produced. There's a lot of duplication taking place there as well, which is problematic. Of the 13,000 currently reported chemicals and plastics from current studies, although there are some upcoming studies that are revealing that up to 16,000 chemicals are now being found in plastics, only half of those can be identified, and 3,200 have been identified as chemicals of concern. So chemicals and plastics as novel entities are appearing on global markets in hugely escalating volumes in the environment and in human bodies at a rate that far exceeds the ability for us to assess their hazards and risks, let alone prevent and control those deemed chemicals and products of concern. And worse yet, plastic pollution is a triple threat alongside biodiversity loss and climate change. It's also long been acknowledged as a threat multiplier. So, and what that means is that plastic pollution acts with other stressors like climate change and biodiversity loss to cause far greater damage than if it occurred in isolation. I recognise that I've spoken for a fair bit and I haven't quite got to your answer about human health. If you'd like me to respond to that now, I can do, or I can certainly wait for a next turn after others have spoken.
I think you can go ahead and you can complete that part, because that way it will be easier for us to kind of take the discussion forward. Yeah, please.
Very briefly then, thank you. So the health impacts of the chemicals associated with plastics include a whole range of diseases, unfortunately. So increased risks of prematurity, stillbirth, birth defects of the reproductive organs, and already you're hearing some of the chemicals associated with plastics have a real impact on the most vulnerable, which are those that are neonatals, for example, and young children. Neurodevelopmental impairment, impaired lung growth, and childhood cancer are also some of the implications of the chemicals, at least associated with plastics, that we know of so far. So the toxic chemicals used in plastics are, for example, colorants, they're in flame retardants, they're in solvents and UV stabilizers and plasticizers. And also we're finding too that, and I mentioned bioplastics a moment ago, plastics alternatives, and we hear those are termed bioplastics, so I'll refer to those as so-called bioplastics because there's some problems with that term, or misconceptions at least with the term bio and bioplastics. Those often contain similar hazardous chemicals and additives to our more conventional fossil fuel-based plastics we're finding. Microplastics, now we're talking not so much just about chemicals, but we're talking also about plastic particles. Microplastics are small fragments of plastics, and even smaller pieces, which are nanoplastics, contain all the same chemical additives as conventional plastics, of course, and they can leach, of products, whole products, and these can leach out of the microplastics and expose our populations. And unfortunately, due to their smaller size, there is a larger surface area to volume ratio, and this makes microplastics particularly hazardous to human environmental health, because in addition to carrying and leaching their toxic chemicals I've just mentioned, their large surface area is very effective at attracting and carrying both pathogens and persistent organic pollutants across territorial boundaries and also into organisms, including human bodies. Finally, the toxic chemicals found in plastics and the pollutants associated with plastics we're exposed to throughout the supply chain, right from extraction all the way through to removal and remediation, can threaten the health of, for example, extraction and production site workers, fence-line communities, from exposure to chemicals, air pollution from waste incineration, water and soil contamination, and other groups particularly vulnerable to exposure to plastic pollution again include children, but also women, marginalised communities, and those directly reliant on unpolluted ecosystems for their livelihoods and survival. And here, the communities that most come to mind for me working in the Pacific Islands are small island developing states. Thank you for that question.
Thank you so much, Professor Tricia. That was really insightful. We have more questions for you, so please stay with us. Let me now bring in our third panelist for the day, David Azule. Let me just introduce David before I pass it on to Siddharth to ask the question. So David Azule is the managing attorney for Center for International Environmental Law's Geneva office and the director of CIEL's Environmental Health Program. David is a French attorney who studied public international law in France and Spain before specializing in environmental law. He comes to CIEL from Friends of the Earth Europe in Brussels, where he coordinated the chemical and nanotechnologies campaign. Before that, he worked as associate in environmental law in the Paris office of the Freshfields Backhaus Deringer. Please forgive me if I mispronounce this name. In addition to directing CIEL's environmental health program, David leads CIEL's nanotechnology project. David also co-leads their plastic work, examining the environmental health aspects of it and coordinating civil society's engagement in global policies forum, such as the United Nations Environment Assembly and the Basel Convention. He also supervises CIEL's work at European Union level to ensure that the health impacts of plastic throughout its life cycle are adequately considered in European Union's policy, and in particular in the design of the European Union Circular Economy Strategy and EU EDG strategy. He's also a member of IPEN, that is International Pollutants Elimination Network Steering Committee. So thank you so much, David, for your time and your participation. Over to you, Siddharth. You may go ahead and ask the question. Thank you.
Yeah. So, David, we know that there were 3 different contact groups that were established. While contact group 1 and 2, could reach a certain conclusion, the third contact group in the meeting was unable to achieve consensus, and it is anticipated that there will be no advancement in the intersessional work. So, could you elaborate on the impact of not reaching consensus in that group? And how will it affect the overall progress of the work that we have till end of 2025 or 2024 this year?
Well, thank you, Siddharth, and thank you, Atin, and thank you very much to CSE for the invitation, for the organization of this great event, and for the question. This is a very good question, a very large question that goes down to really the heart of your question, the heart of what we're trying to address in this webinar, which is really what sort of treaty will we get at the end of the negotiation. And rather than talking specifically about what happened in contact group 3 and elsewhere, if you allow me to take a little step back from going back to some of the elements that you introduced and that both Sam and Tricia had talked about, which is the negotiation dynamic, what we're trying to achieve with this negotiation and what we've been seeing in the negotiations so far. The mandate that was given to this group to negotiate a treaty was a treaty to end plastic pollution. There are a different understanding of what plastic pollution is, from the very reductive of plastic pollution being the plastic that you see in the environment, the pieces of plastic packaging that you see in the environment, which is extremely narrow and reductive, to what in our sense is the correct understanding of what plastic pollution is, which is the definition that is being used among others by OECD and other institutions that talk about all emissions and risks that arise from the production, use, waste management, and leakage of plastics. So in that respect, we really are, and that definition and that mandate that was given doesn't come out of nowhere. It is the result of many years of work that was done under the auspices of the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program, to get to the point of the mandate. Remember that before the mandate was adopted, there were, I think, 7 or 8 rounds of ad hoc expert group that really got to the heart of what is the problem that we're trying to address here. And those discussions led to the mandate. And the mandate was very clear in that this issue of plastic pollution, it's not a waste problem. It is not an ocean problem. It is really a overproduction and overconsumption problem, which is why it requires us to end plastic pollution, to address this issue in a full life cycle approach. Meaning that we have to go from upstream to downstream, midstream, and adopt a variety of issues. And of course, plastic pollution is very complex. Plastic as a material is complex, but also it is so pervasive in every aspect of our life and in every single economic sector that there will not be one single magic bullet solution that if we do this, then the problem is over. We will have to adopt a variety of measures both a variety of measures to get to the heart of the problem, but also in reality to adapt to the very distinct situation that various countries in the world are in. India is in a very different place than Ghana, than New Zealand. Pacific Islands and small island states have their own issue. Even though they like to think differently, developed countries are absolutely not dealing with plastic pollution in a way that is satisfactory, whether it is from the waste management side or from the production side. There are places, as Tricia alluded to in terms of health impacts of plastic, that are called cancer alleys around the petrochemical production areas of the world. And many of them are in the developed world. And all of this is part of plastic pollution. And so, I'm sorry, that was a little detour to go back to understanding what is it that we're trying to do. And also going back to what happened in Nairobi, the dynamics that we saw. What we saw is the vast majority of countries in the world, I think by the count, what we looked at from the various interventions that we made, that were made, around over 120 countries spoke in favor of a broad treaty that would span measures that would include some form, without getting into the detail, but some form of control of primary polymer production and some form of detoxification of the whole plastic supply chain, which are really two key aspects. In addition, of course, to support and amelioration of the waste management system, of the financing system to implement all of this treaty, etc. So really, we saw a very large majority of countries pushing in that direction and ready to act. Again, we saw leadership from the African region. We saw strong leadership from the Pacific Island nation. We saw valuable leadership on certain issues from GRULAC. We saw leadership from countries in the global West, one would say. And I would say on the other side of the spectrum, we saw a very small number of countries very actively and deliberately oppose both a scope of the treaty that would match the mandate and opposing a understanding of the problem, basically trying to object to the common understanding of what the problem is that we had developed throughout the years in the work that led to the adoption of the mandate and to that negotiations. Now, most of those countries, as was mentioned in the introduction, are in fact large oil, gas, and plastic producers countries. And we could see this already in Montevideo during INC1, clearly in Paris during INC2, and they're in Nairobi. They're entering this negotiation with a very organized and structured approach to prevent this treaty from delivering on its mandate. And I'm being very blunt and candid because, again, this is what we saw. And we saw that both in the position that they put forward, but also in the strategies that they've adopted to prevent the treaty from delivering, including importing strategies from the climate space and others where they used questions of procedures and strategies to derail the conversation. First of all, to prevent the group from having conversation that needed to be had, and from also trying to block the negotiation by renegotiating very well-established precedents. One of those very well-established precedents is that in the, and I'm going to get a little geeky lawyery, excuse me for this, but this is also why probably you've invited me this morning. But there is something that is often overlooked. What everybody is interested in talking about the substance, talking about the solutions. What are we going to do? Something that is often overlooked, but that is quite important, is how are we having those discussions? How are we going to discuss and decide the content, the what? And this goes back to the rules of procedure. It's the rules that govern the discussion. And over the past 50 years, many treaties for environmental issues have been negotiated, some being more successful than others, but the most well-known are, of course, the UNFCCC on climate, the Montreal Protocol, the Convention on Biodiversity, the Basel Convention, Stockholm Conventions, Bamako Convention, Waigani Convention. They're international, multilateral, and regional conventions. All of those negotiations were adopted, were negotiated following a certain number of rules. And those rules of procedure, even though they changed slightly from here to there in the detail, the core of the rules of procedure remain the same. And this is something that has been established under international law for a long time, which is you strive for consensus. You try to get everybody to agree on something. And when all attempts at consensus have failed, then you resort to a vote. That is usually a 2/3 majority or 3/4 majority. This changes a little. And this was agreed. We agreed to do the same thing for this particular negotiation during the preliminary round of negotiations that took place in Dakar in June 2022. And then in Montevideo, we agreed to do this, even though there was still a little element that needed to be discussed. But when we arrived in Paris, those groups of countries that are opposed to, I'm being very blunt with you, but those groups of countries that are opposed to this treaty being successful and reaching the mandate that has been given to it, try to reopen this and try to say, no, this is not something that we can agree. And what we want is a veto right for every single country negotiating to prevent an agreement from being reached. And because of the existential nature of what some of the elements that we're discussing there has for these countries, the risk is that if this is not overcome, if we don't find a good way forward to move forward, those countries would succeed in preventing the treaty from delivering. This is what we saw in Nairobi. When we got to the heart of the discussion, those countries basically said, we're not willing. And again, we're talking about a very small number of countries, but that take a lot of floor space in the discussion, and that take a lot of attention. And those countries managed to block the conversation because they came here, they didn't come here and try to actually negotiate. A negotiation is you try to understand where the other person is coming from. You use the existing scientific data and all of the body of work that has been done to understand what it is that you have to do. And then you try to find some common ground about what needs to be done and what can be done. This is what negotiation is. A number of those countries came there and said, we refuse the scientific consensus. We question the scientific consensus about what plastic pollution is and what needs to be done. And here are the red line that we're starting those negotiations with that basically would prevent us, that try to renegotiate the mandate that was given to this group to negotiate. So this is the situation we're in now. Again, we saw strong leadership from a number of countries in every region, from the African region, from the Pacific, Asia-Pacific region, from the Latin American region, from the European region, and others who are trying to oppose that and are trying to move forward. But this is something that we fear, or we are concerned, will require some further attention in the next meetings. Maybe a last element of this to understand why it happened the way it did in Nairobi. Remember that at the last negotiation session that took place in Paris, we lost 2.5 days, and there was a lot of very visual drama with this small group of countries blocking the negotiations on questions of procedure. And I think everybody arrived in Nairobi with the idea that we want to avoid that repeating. We want to avoid that situation repeating itself, and we want to discuss the how. We want to discuss the what. We want to discuss what are we going to do to stop plastic pollution. And so everybody was very accommodating and try to leave that issue of how do we make decision exactly And is everybody, the underlying question, which is everybody negotiating in good faith on the side? Because that was a potentially explosive question. But by ignoring this question, what we got was everybody trying to negotiate, except for a small number of countries who then blocked progress towards the end, and led to the relative failure that we saw in Nairobi, which is, yes, we do have a revised zero draft, but it's now vastly balloon and very hard to manage, and it's probably weaker than the original zero draft that we got to in Nairobi. And that question of intersessional work is sort of lost. We're basically losing 5 months because, again, the vast majority of countries agreed that there is very important work that needs to be done to deliver the treaty that we were asked to deliver through the negotiation. We don't have much time, and everybody was really willing to engage on specific issue on how to develop further. So when we get to the next meeting in Ottawa, we have made progress and we're closer to a treaty and closer to the solution. And those countries, small number of countries, basically said, no, unless you agree to what we want to say, which is a very strongly reduced mandate, we will not let the world progress on this path. And that, I think, is a serious issue.
Thank you so much, David. In fact, you pretty much answered our next question to you on the rules of procedure. But this question basically we kept for all the panelists to respond quickly. Since you have already talked about it, if I may ask Dr. Sam and Professor Tricia also to share your views on how do you see the procedures going forward in absence of an adopted rules of procedure. Now we are expecting to have the revised zero draft, which could be termed as the first draft. We don't know. It's a much bigger document as compared to the zero draft that we had. Let me just quickly ask Dr. Sam to respond that how do you see, since the zero rules of procedure is yet to be adopted, how do you think the discussions taking shape going forward? Over to you, Dr. Sam. Thank you.
Thank you so much once again. Thanks to Tricia and David for their overwhelming contributions from a scientific angle, and also from all that David said. He has been following all these procedures for all this while, and he's well versed in other conventions, which have also managed to participate, especially the Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm, and then many other conventions. And as he said, I mean, the things are almost the same concerning rules of procedure. So there are precedences that we need to follow. This plastic one is not any new thing that we know about how to negotiate. But as he said, there's a calculated effort by a group of countries to derail the process, to derail the mandate of UNEA. But 54 countries of Africa are also resolved that we will move forward. We want to see an end plastic pollution as UNEA mandated, and also our AMSEN or African leaders have mandated. So we believe that, yes, there are, forces to, derail the process, but if we take our time, take some effort, and then maybe do a lot of bilaterals and meeting people, groups, we will be able to come to a common understanding where we will resolve the issues and try to save our planet from collapse and our people, our populations. So yes, going forward, I'm optimistic that Africa will lead the way, and then we'll be able to, meet other groups also, and then we move forward because we have a common agenda, don't forget. So yes, rules of procedures may pose a threat, but we believe that we will overcome it because, these are strategies that people have in place, but we will re-strategize and regroup and see how we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sam. That was really, really very helpful. Professor Tricia, if I may ask you to quickly respond on this agenda.
Well, I just love Dr. Sam's positivity. I wish I shared so much confidence in the process. I often defer to David and Ciel and the team for advice around matters such as these, because my my experience in other multilateral environmental agreements extremely limited to none. So I can speak to the science, but not so much to these matters. However, I do have a growing sense of anxiety, to be honest, around the rules of procedure, because for me, it's a make or break. If this is vetoed by a small set of countries, we could see, for me, the end of any potential treaty that's really going to make any difference further from really just the business as usual. And that would be devastating, because so many of us have put so much time and effort into this. We have a lot at stake here, all of us as global citizens, and for that to happen would be truly devastating, I think, for all of us. So whilst I'd love to share Dr. Sam's positivity, I am slightly nervous about this, and I think probably rightly so. I think many of us are. However, as I was saying, it was very disappointing not to have any consensus around intercessional work. But those of us who are so dedicated to this space, and I would include the Scientist Coalition in this, and I know that David and his team and others, no doubt on this call too, no doubt Dr. Sam included, are really dedicated to progressing things along regardless of any formal process in the intercessional period, acknowledging, as David said, this could put us 5 months behind, and I can't bear to see that happen. So that's all I can say about this. Some nervousness and real hope that things will come together at INC4 and before that, hopefully too, starting to sort of, I guess, galvanize around something more positive.
Thank you so much, Professor Tricia. Siddharth, I know that you have many questions to ask, but I'm not sure how many questions we can ask within the time. So Siddharth, you go ahead with your question to the panelists.
So I think we have some questions from our participants, and there are some interesting ones. So let me flesh out the ones that I find interesting and put it in front of the panel. So one question is from Dumiso from Iswatini. He's asking, does the world have an option to bypass the conflicted member states or the ones who are creating this conflict, if it is to meet the target that we have set for ourselves in 2024? Like you said, the issue of plastic is a producer-consumer issue, and hence there is, I believe, power in the consumers rallying behind the delivering of the treaty. So, David, do you think, or to all the panelists, do you think that we have that bandwidth? Like someone, I think the members, the delegation from Angola made this very strong statement that we can't be held hostage by a group of countries, and if someone wants to be left behind, we are ready to leave them behind. So, is there a scope for doing that? Is what my question is to the panelists.
I'm happy to take this one, and the short answer is yes, there is. There are ways. I mean, one of the big challenges in this situation is always, as we know, plastic is a global issue. It is traded as a material, precursors are traded, wastes are traded, and no countries can address this issue on its own. And we know this because many of the countries have tried, and even the countries with the most drastic regulation around plastics are still feeling the impact of it. And this is why we're having a negotiation treaty. And so, but this is the case for many treaties, and not all treaties are universal, meaning not all treaties have a membership partisanship where all countries are members. It is the case for some of them, and they're the one that work best. But even for those that don't have all parties as members, there are ways to regulate, to use trade, for example, to regulate the trade between parties and non-parties to address this particular issue. And that serves a dual function. First, it ensures that those countries that become party to a treaty are not penalized by the free riders operating outside the space of the treaty and continuing to trade the regulated material within the space of the treaty. And again, This is very common. It exists in Basel Convention, it exists in Montreal Protocol, it exists in the CBD. Most of the treaties that exist today include these kinds of provisions. So that's one of the function of those aspects. The second function of this aspect is that it creates a strong incentive for those countries who are not yet a party to the treaty to actually join the treaty and become a member. And through these provisions, this is how the Basel Convention, again, the Montreal Protocol, the Stockholm Convention, or the CBD achieved quasi-universal membership, where you have, in most of those instances, over 178 countries who became parties to these conventions, because every country saw that it was in their advantage to be part of the system rather than to remain outside. It took a little time when, at first, some countries remained on the side and remained outside of the system. But the system was built in such a way that there was a strong incentive for those countries to join eventually. And this is where we're getting. And my sense is probably that this is where we would have to go also for this plastic treaty.
Yes, thank you. If I may quickly add to that, thanks, David, for all those contributions. I have said already, and maybe you are excited about my positivity and maybe where I'm coming from. Don't forget that Africa, we have 54 countries, and our continent is one of the most vulnerable so far as plastic pollution is concerned. That is why we are resolved that we need to have that kind of treaty in tandem with AMSEN and also the UNIA overall arcane mandates. So we will do our best to, come to a table for negotiations. But we're not going to chicken out. We're going to just be walkovers. No. For example, at INC3, I think we showed that we are not just walkovers. We need to be heard. Our voices need to be heard. We are a lot. We form more than a quarter of the UN, countries. So we need to be on the table together with others on equal, we are not minors or, for that matter, that you can just push us. We are there to negotiate. And we believe that this is something that's affecting our people in particular. So if it's about economies, if it's about trade, we are also affected. All the, excuse me for my language, the evil things that come out of plastic are coming to our content, affecting our people. So we will not sit down for that kind of, to suffer any longer. We need to have a solution. So we will go there to negotiate. But if others think that perhaps because they are rich or they have the resources and then they want to ensure that their voice are the one which are heard, we will not agree to that. We will make sure that our voice are equally heard and that we will get what is best for our planet and for our people. So we will move forward. As David said, for other conventions, even when we have done all these things and it's done and we have gone to signatory at the plenipotentiary conferences, not all countries, accede or ratify the conventions. But with our population, 54 countries, with others, we can have a critical mass to ratify this future treaty, and then others can join later. But we'll move forward. Thank you.
Tricia, any thoughts before we close? And I hand it over to
just want to say thank you to Dr. Sam, because I tell you what, we need more people like yourself with that much passion around a region, a big, strong, powerful region of countries who are dedicated to seeing this through. And just hearing you speaking just makes me feel so much more hopeful. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So Atin, I hand it back to you.
Right. So we have 1 minute left to kind of touch this 1 hour mark. It was fascinating to say the least. And we pretty much heard three different perspectives. Like, INC is a member state-led decision-making process. But the role of the legal community that David represents and the role that the scientific community that Tricia represents are also very, very critical. Any multilateral negotiation process is a very complex, geopolitics. And what we have observed is definitely we have seen many hits and misses. But then, and then looking at the rules of procedure not being adopted even in INC3, and things, the buck has been now pushed to INC4, and we have to wait and see what happens there. But looking at the proceedings so far, and big agenda of the full life cycle of plastic is slightly getting derailed. The upstream is basically almost out of the window if it continues like that. So now basically we have to kind of rest our hopes to the midstream and downstream measures. The downstream is not a problem. So everybody is happy to think of plastic pollution or take plastic pollution as a waste management problem and do whatever needs to be done around that. But the chemicals of concern definitely emerged as a very strong agenda. Tricia has spoken a lot about it. And we probably need more evidence. I mean, there are numerous number of chemicals in the market. Many of them are of concerns, but then probably INC is expecting more scientific evidence to actually identify. And we also need a proactive disclosure policy. Like when we buy a plastic product, we don't really know the properties of it, apart from the polymers being used, what additives are going into making those products and whether it's safe for human consumption. So, I mean, a lot of discussion happened today, and I thank from the bottom of my heart from all our colleagues in CSE, and we have seen huge participation. I've been following the other social media platforms, and we have seen quite a number of colleagues joining over there. So we'll continue to follow this discussion, and I hope to bring you back, bring all the panelists back, maybe just ahead of INC4. I mean, though very little is expected in between since the intersessional work is almost kind of stalled. So thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Sam. Thank you, Professor Tricia. And thank you, David, for your time and for your insightful discussion. Sid, very quick comment from you, and then we can close. And thanks to all our participants as well. We have seen participants. I mean, I was trying to identify them by their countries and the registrations, and I could see at least 40, 50 countries are listening to us today right here, right now. So Siddharth, over to you, and then we can close.
Yeah,
Please,
thank you.
my
Thank you
last
so
comment. Can you allow me to say the last thing?
Please.
Don't throw your hands into the air just like that. All the streams are still part of it. Early days yet. The upstream, the midstream, and the downstream are all part of it. So don't lose hope yet. It is part of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Sam. You really give us a lot of hope, and we really want it in this critical times. Thank you so much, Tricia, Dr. Sam, David, for agreeing to be a part of this discussion. Being like we are in so different time zones, and thank you so much for making this possible. And we hope to stay connected and take this agenda forward to bring more awareness about this issue in India and with the countries that we are working with. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.